Under the sparkling light of crystal chandeliers at Windsor Castle, a royal banquet was held to honor unity and tradition. The world expected an elegant evening where generations would blend, where the past and future would shake hands. But behind the glamour, a silent battle had erupted, not through words, but through meaningful actions. A name removed from the guest list shook the palace, revealing deep rifts within the royal family. This is a surprising story about tense moments within the royal family. What do you think about Queen Camilla's decision to ban Princess Charlotte from the royal banquet? And Catherine's response when faced with this? If you have an opinion, don't hesitate to leave a 1 if you agree, or a 0 if you think otherwise. Enjoy the video and don't forget to subscribe to support us. Princess Charlotte, the girl who carries the bloodline of the future king, should have been an integral part of the banquet. Yet her name was removed not by accident, but by a deliberate decision. Her absence was not just a ceremonial mistake. It was a clear message, a boundary had been drawn, a declaration of power had been made. However, Charlotte is not just a name on a list. She is a symbol of the new generation, and her presence cannot be erased so easily. Queen Camilla, with her sharpness and decisiveness, stood behind the decision to exclude Charlotte. Beneath the guise of royal protocol, she sent a wordless message. Power in the monarchy still rests in her hands. But this action was not just a political move. It was a challenge, a silent defiance to those who dare to oppose her. Camilla, with her piercing gaze and subtle smile, likely believed that her boundaries would never be crossed. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, did not respond with arguments or public declarations. Instead, she chose action. As she entered the grand banquet hall hand in hand with Charlotte, she left the room breathless. Her gaze spoke volumes. It declared that her children were not pawns to be pushed aside. Catherine's presence was not just a personal moment. It was a powerful statement. She was the mother, the protector, and a force that could not be ignored. The event organizers, who had hoped for a flawless gathering to celebrate unity, found themselves swept up in the whirlwind of royal drama. A few days before the event, as the guest list was being reviewed, a senior secretary made a shocking discovery: Charlotte's name was missing. This was not just a minor error, it was a sign of deeper conflicts, cracks that even the grandeur of Windsor Castle could not conceal. They quietly prepared for an evening they knew would become the talk of the town. As the story of Catherine's actions spread, the public could hardly contain their excitement. The image of a mother standing up to protect her daughter, defying the rigid court rules, struck a chord with millions. On social media and in the press, Catherine was hailed as a symbol of courage and familial love. The banquet, originally intended to showcase unity, became the stage for a larger story, the story of a woman rewriting the rules right at the royal dinner table. In the brilliant light of Windsor Castle, the banquet was not just a royal event. It was a battlefield of loyalty, power, and motherhood. Catherine, with a simple yet powerful act, reminded the world that her family could not be sidelined. This event, originally planned to honor tradition, became a landmark moment where a mother reshaped the future of the monarchy step by step, hand in hand with her daughter. Princess Charlotte's name was missing not by a shift or misplacement, but by a complete omission. This oversight was quietly and cautiously addressed, but the responses it elicited sent a chill down the spines of many royal family members. The Queen wished for this year's banquet to be an adults-only affair, according to information from Clarence House. But this was not a general policy, and the omission was not applied fairly. Prince George's name was on the list, along with some foreign royal children, some even younger than Charlotte. This wasn't a matter of protocol, it was a personal issue. The atmosphere in Adelaide Cottage shifted when Catherine received confirmation of this disregard. Catherine sensed something was amiss from the planning stages when Charlotte asked her what dress she should wear for the banquet, and Catherine gently encouraged her to wait. But that wait turned into heartache as the little princess had been rehearsing her greetings for days. She even asked her mother if she could help welcome the guests. Charlotte had seen her brother George take on more responsibilities, and this banquet felt like a special moment for her, one she had quietly been waiting for. And so that moment arrived not by mistake, but by a deliberate decision. Staff at Kensington tried to ease the situation. They offered other events attempting to distract her with outings. But children understand, and Charlotte, intelligent and perceptive, sensed the truth even before her mother spoke. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, and that night her soft voice shattered the silence of the room. Catherine hugged her daughter tightly, running her hand through her hair, trying to hold back tears. It wasn't just an exclusion, it was a message, and Catherine saw it clearly. Those around Camilla remained silent. No explanations, no clarifications, but Catherine felt it the queen consort had become much more rigid in recent weeks, tightening her grip on the decisions regarding certain royal rituals. Catherine realized that Camilla was not just making the usual ceremonial moves, she was quietly taking strategic steps. An insider revealed, "Camilla has started drawing boundaries, and this time she drew them on a child." However, Catherine was no ordinary royal mother. She had witnessed Diana weather the storms of silence and dignity, and now she was facing her own challenge. With a grace forged from steel, Catherine silently made a decision. The silence of a mother, a decision of a queen. In the hours following Charlotte's quiet sorrow, all eyes turned to Clarence House, the source of the decision that cast a shadow over what should have been a night of celebration. While the palace maintained its usual calm and discretion behind the scenes, whispers grew louder. According to insiders, Queen Camilla made the final decision on the matter without hesitation. There was no discussion, compromise, or consideration for Charlotte's growing royal role. The decision was made in a private meeting with 2 senior aides. "She's too young," Camilla was reportedly heard saying in a calm yet firm tone. "It's not the time yet, but no one thinks it's about age." Not exactly. Charlotte had previously attended similar formal events. She had been present at coronation rehearsals, state funerals, and even walked alongside the family at public memorials. She had stood with more grace than many adults, yet here she was sidelined. This timing was what concerned many. In recent months, Charlotte's confidence had grown along with her public presence. Royal watchers began to notice how much she resembled her grandmother Diana, not just in appearance, but in her demeanor and presence. This had not gone unnoticed by the public, nor by Camilla. Sources indicated that Camilla's attitude in the days leading up to the banquet was unusually cautious. She had become more decisive through small but clear actions. Seating arrangements were adjusted at the last minute. Her personal crest was emphasized more in press releases. There were subtle suggestions that her lineage, though not royal, still deserved more respect. Some believed this was due to her relentless efforts to solidify her position in a family still overshadowed by Diana. Others, however, remained uncertain. She saw Catherine's children as the future, but not necessarily her own future. A former royal staffer shared, "There's a difference, and she acts accordingly. Behind the palace walls, these tensions rarely erupt in public. They're controlled through quiet gestures, in decisions about the schedule, in who gets seen and who doesn't." But this choice, a royal banquet where unity was meant to be celebrated, seemed to be a carefully considered move. Camilla didn't just draw a boundary, she crossed it. When Catherine was informed of Camilla's reasoning, there were no loud outbursts, no angry arguments, only silence. Yet those closest to her noticed a change, a stillness that often signals impending action. Catherine understood the power of being underestimated. She had endured years of quiet scrutiny before stepping into her role as the Princess of Wales, and she had learned that in the monarchy, the strongest messages are rarely spoken aloud. That night, as Charlotte slept next to her stuffed animal, unaware of the conversations unfolding around her, Catherine stood by the window in her private office, phone in hand. She didn't call the press. She didn't call her friends. She called the one person with the authority to change the course of the story that night. She didn't ask for permission. She was making a statement that the Queen Consort would hear not through words but through her presence, a presence she would never forget. Catherine discovered and refused to remain silent. The call she made that night was not to negotiate, not to argue or plead, it was to inform. The line was brief, the message clear. Princess Charlotte would attend the banquet. Whether her name appeared on the official guest list or not, she would be there. The person on the other end of the line did not resist. They couldn't. While Catherine had learned the art of silence to navigate within the palace, there were moments when her determination allowed for no debate. This was one of those moments. She ended the call with a calm thank you, then turned back to her preparations. The next morning, the halls of Windsor were livelier than usual. There was a shift in energy, unspoken but palpable, a change in the tone of the staff. Rumors spread quickly throughout the palace, and by dawn, many knew that Catherine would not abide by Camilla's decision. She had chosen action over diplomacy. A royal attendant later remarked, "We've seen her quiet elegance, but this time it's different. This is Catherine in armor." Throughout the day, preparations for the banquet continued uninterrupted on the surface. Florists arranged pristine white lilies and towering pink roses in the ballroom. The gilded silverware was polished until it sparkled under the soft chandelier light. Musicians rehearsed in the display room, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. Clarence House aides were reportedly holding a private meeting to assess how far Catherine would go. Some believed she would yield. Others knew better. Once she had drawn a boundary for her children, there would be no turning back. A senior official confided that while Camilla maintained an outward calm, those close to her described her mood as quite tense. Her morning press briefing was brief. Her words blunt. She instructed her staff to proceed as planned. There would be no changes to the guest list, no new seating arrangements, no special accommodations. Charlotte would not be added. This decision was final. It's reported that she said, "Don't make this a spectacle." But even as she spoke those words, she knew Catherine would come, and she would not come alone. She personally chose a dress for Charlotte. An elegant dark blue silk gown with intricate pearls, a subtle touch reminiscent of Diana's classic style. Charlotte didn't ask any questions. She simply looked at her mother, sensing the seriousness behind her gentle demeanor. When Catherine knelt beside her and gently fastened the silver pendant around Charlotte's neck, she whispered, "You have every right to be there." Charlotte didn't respond. She simply nodded. That night, as the car drove through the palace gates, Charlotte's small hand rested in her mother's. The press had gathered in full force, expecting nothing more than a royal appearance, but they never anticipated the image of a future queen arriving with her daughter. Both were dressed modestly, defiantly, stepping into the very room that had tried to erase their presence. Catherine didn't need to speak. Her presence was enough to say it all, and it was about to silence the entire room. Charlotte's tears and the story behind them. The moment the palace door swung open, the sound of heels clicking against the polished marble floor echoed like a drumbeat. Every head in the banquet hall turned not because of protocol, but because of instinct. She was there, Catherine, and beside her Charlotte, holding her mother's hand with a quiet strength far beyond her years. The photographers had prepared for a long line of familiar faces, but this appearance shattered all expectations. If you feel the quiet strength from Catherine and Charlotte, hit that like button. Now, don't forget to share this video with your friends so you can experience this emotional moment together. And if you want to keep up with more unexpected royal stories, be sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. The flashes of cameras went off in shock. Even the staff trained never to react exchanged glances. Catherine did not hesitate. She didn't stop to pose for the press or adjust her steps for effect. She walked with the calmness of someone who knew she belonged there and that her daughter did as well. Charlotte, in her navy blue silk gown, walked as though she had been familiar with this place for years. Not with arrogance, but with dignity. The kind that doesn't seek attention yet always commands it. The royal guards quietly searched behind the scenes. Her name had still not been added to the final seating chart. There was no seat card for her at the table, but Catherine had arrived prepared, and so had Charlotte. Catherine's small handbag was said to contain a neatly folded card engraved with Charlotte's name in calligraphy, a subtle and deliberate detail. Inside the ballroom, the orchestra played while the guests mingled, unaware that the atmosphere of the evening was about to shift. Queen Camilla stood near the head of the table, smiling politely at the ambassadors and nobles. But when she caught sight of the entrance, her expression changed. Not abruptly, just enough for those who were observant to notice her jaw tighten. Her fingers subtly curled around the stem of her wine glass. The staff stood still, waiting for instructions, but no one spoke. Camilla said nothing. She didn't gesture. She simply watched as Catherine and Charlotte walked across the room, the guests parting like the sea. It wasn't just the queen consort who noticed. Other members of the royal family diverted their gaze from conversations, some nodding subtly, others quietly observing with surprise. No one uttered a word, for the message had been conveyed without a press release, without confrontation, only two figures hand in hand walking across the room, silently defying any attempt to push one of them out. Catherine greeted a few guests along the way, her voice gentle yet firm. As she reached the long dining table, she quietly pulled out a chair. It was not Charlotte's designated seat, for she hadn't been assigned one, but that no longer mattered. Catherine placed the card with her daughter's name next to the fine dinnerware, then sat down beside her. No one dared to object. The orchestra continued to play, but behind the melody was a silent declaration. The future had entered the room, and it would not be ignored. The banquet began, but the guest list had changed. What was meant to be a smooth affair, a meticulously orchestrated evening, down to the second, with dishes presented as flawlessly as clockwork and conversations carefully maintained within royal bounds, had shifted. But as soon as the first course was served, the atmosphere shifted. The appearance of Catherine and Charlotte didn't just cause a ripple, it completely upended the mood. Guests exchanged glances between the delicately arranged appetizers. The whispers, though soft, spread across the table like a breeze through tall grass. The cameras weren't rolling in the ballroom, but had they been, that moment wouldn't have needed narration. No drama, no loud voices, no stares from across the table. But the tension was undeniable, and it all centered around a seat that had not been planned for. Camilla remained silent, saying nothing to Catherine nor to the aides beside her. But her silence was not quiet submission. It was a calculated freeze. She raised her glass in a dignified toast, the composure of a seasoned partner. Yet those who knew her best could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided looking down at the two seats at the far end of the table where Charlotte sat. There was no scene of chaos, no overt resistance. But from a royal perspective, this was a bold challenge, and it played out in front of the world's most powerful guests. Charlotte, unaware of the political weight surrounding her seat at the table, sat down with perfect grace. She only spoke when asked. She quietly thanked the servers. She reached for her napkin at the right moment, and with each gesture, she dispelled any remark that she was too young or not yet ready. What Camilla had intended to quietly exclude had now become a public display of the qualities Charlotte had been denied the chance to showcase. A silent victory was unfolding before everyone's eyes. Meanwhile, Catherine remained calm but vigilant. She understood the price that came with such a move. Royal protocol is never broken without consequences, even when it's done in silence. But for her, this had never been about protocol. It was about protection, ensuring her daughter understood that her worth was not defined by the discomfort of others. It was not an act of revenge. It was a correction. In the middle of the evening, a servant discreetly brought an updated seating chart to one of the aides behind Camilla. Her expression didn't change when she glanced at it, but she didn't return it. She folded the paper in half and tucked it under her plate. A quiet concession, but not one filled with warmth. The meal continued. The speeches began. The cameras were back, but the story of that night had already been written. It wouldn't appear in any official summaries or press releases. It would be spoken of in conversations in the hallways of the staff, in the minds of those who witnessed it. The child who wasn't invited had arrived, and the woman beside her had made sure the crown saw her not as a child, but as a rightful presence, someone who belonged there. Catherine walked in hand with Charlotte. As the delicate dessert with threads of sugar and citrus cream was served, the entire room subtly adjusted around the quiet power that had entered uninvited, but could not be refused. Charlotte's presence did not disrupt the ceremony as feared. It did the opposite. It stabilized the atmosphere, eased the mood, and reminded those seated around the table that royalty is not only inherited, but also embodied. At one point, a visiting Danish princess leaned toward Charlotte with a warm smile, gently discussing horses with her. Charlotte responded with calm and warmth, her gaze occasionally drifting toward Catherine, as if drawing strength from her mother's composed presence. The child, once uncertain about her own worth, was now capturing hearts not with arrogance, but with grace. She didn't need to lecture or defend herself. Her actions spoke for everything. One dignitary remarked, "This is no longer a banquet. This is a lesson in the art of quiet leadership." Camilla maintained her composure, but there was no wavering. Her laughter during the speeches was now softer, her gaze sharper. Occasionally, she took a sip of wine with a grace that seemed almost rehearsed, but even that couldn't conceal what had transpired. The exclusion didn't embarrass Catherine, it embarrassed the throne. Somewhere in the far corner of the room, a tailor discreetly handed a note to the aides. "Please retouch the photos of the guests, including Princess Charlotte." Damage control, swift and silent, had already begun behind the scenes. The narrative was shifting, and the palace knew it. They couldn't allow the image of a child sitting unnoticed or unrecognized to leak. Even in silence, stories were still being written, and the palace at least understood the power of an image. At one point, Charlotte leaned toward Catherine and whispered something that made her mother smile, not broadly, but deeply. It was a smile filled with gratitude, pride, and vindication. A mother who had fought not loudly, not publicly, but with purpose. And in that brief exchange, something changed. The future of the monarchy did not sit on the throne or behind velvet ropes that night. She sat in her navy blue dress, her eyes shining with an increasing understanding of the weight of a name that many would rather forget because of what it stood for. The night fell. Applause echoed. Glasses clinked, but the silent victory had already taken place. As Catherine helped Charlotte rise from her seat when it was time to leave, she did so slowly, cautiously. She gently placed her hand on her daughter's back as they walked toward the exit. The battle at the table. The silent defiance of a mother. When the heavy door closed behind them, the cool air of the corridor rushed in. Catherine paused for a moment, just long enough to let out a quiet sigh of relief. Charlotte gripped her small handbag tightly and looked up, her face still glowing with a mixture of awe and contemplation. She didn't fully understand the weight of that evening, but she knew something had changed. Catherine ran her fingers through her daughter's hair, saying little, only nodding as if to say, "You did well." And Charlotte, standing a little taller than she had just hours before, nodded back. However, inside the ballroom, the silence was even louder than the music still playing. Camilla remained seated, her expression unreadable, as if by staying perfectly still this moment could pass without consequences. But it didn't. The guests no longer whispered softly. They were murmuring openly. The dignitaries exchanged looks with quiet urgency. A senior aide was seen pulling a subordinate aside with a dossier of the event, perhaps already rewriting the official account of the night before it was released to the press. Every royal event is meant to leave a legacy, but it is rare that that legacy belongs to a child who was never meant to attend. Camilla rose from her seat a few minutes later, muttering something about exhaustion. It was sudden but not entirely unexpected. She left without raising a final toast, without a word of farewell to the guests. The click of her heels echoed sharply on the ballroom floor as she exited, and while most bowed or curtsied in respect, the room grew noticeably colder. In her absence, the weight of what had transpired began to settle. It was not just a silent challenge, but a calculated move. The boundary drawn in private had been blurred in front of the public. On the way back to the car, Catherine and Charlotte remained silent throughout the journey. The lights of Windsor faded behind them, and the countryside stretched out ahead like a peaceful reward. Then Charlotte softly asked, "Will I be invited next time?" Her voice was gentle, but her eyes searched for something steady, something lasting on her mother's face. Catherine turned her expression unwavering. "I will always belong wherever I bring grace, and I did that tonight." It was not a promise born of anger or bitterness. It was a truth, a lesson gently wrapped in strength, a lesson Charlotte would remember long after the wedding dresses were hung up and the headlines faded away. By morning, the press would speculate, analysts would skim through every word, photographs would be dissected, and royal watchers would try to decode every exchanged glance. But none of them would fully grasp what had truly happened. A child quietly erased was brought back home not by force but by the steady hand of a mother. And a queen consort, confident in her position, was reminded that true power is not bestowed by titles or tradition. Sometimes it walks alongside a child and silently changes the entire room. The consequences and lesson for a future queen had been learned. The morning flooded Windsor with a silence after a storm that no one dared to mention. The press was delivered to the palace gates in sturdy folders, and by mid-morning the images had spread across the world. Catherine serene in her silver-blue satin gown and Charlotte by her side, eyes wide back straight. No caption could fully capture it. The world had witnessed what the palace had tried to conceal: a daughter rising to her place and a mother unwilling to let her be taken. The story spread everywhere, but within the palace no one spoke openly. It simply was what it was. Silence became the shield. But in the hallways and private drawing rooms, the message had been conveyed. Camilla was said to have disappeared from sight for the remainder of the week. Aides described her mood as unusually closed off. Officially, she was resting. Unofficially, she was regrouping. Whatever her intentions, they backfired right before her eyes. Her power was not questioned by resistance, but replaced by presence. She had drawn the boundaries of protocol with a pen. Catherine erased them with grace. And now, the queen consort had to face a new reality. A reality where her influence, though formidable, could no longer be overlooked when it came to the children of Wales. As for Catherine, she returned to her everyday life without fanfare. No interviews, no quotes, no meticulously crafted social media posts. That Monday morning, she walked through the school gates with Charlotte as if nothing had ever happened. But for those who observed closely, everything had changed. The other mothers at the gate smiled a little longer. The staff bowed not just out of duty, but with respect. And Charlotte, who once whispered that she had done something wrong, now walked with quiet confidence, knowing that her place had been earned not through noise, but through love. Inside the palace, the whispers began to shift. Some aides started speculating whether this was the beginning of a larger transformation, not a power struggle, but a generational turning point. Catherine was no longer just the beautiful wife of the heir. She had become someone entirely different, a protector for the next king, a silent reformer shaping the future with every unspoken decision. And Charlotte, still very young, had become a symbol of that future. Resilient calm, present without hesitation. No statements were made about the banquet. Official summaries glossed over the guest list, but the images remained. The world had already chosen what it would remember. Not the menu, not the fresh flowers, but the moment a mother walked into the room with her daughter, staring tradition in the face without flinching. The monarchy had survived scandals, exile, and divorce. But this time it was changed by something much quieter. A child left off the list, a mother bringing her daughter back onto it, and a future queen, now understanding that her presence was not given, it had been declared. There are moments in royal history that are not announced in press releases or official records, but they echo louder than any coronation. This is not just a story about a seat at a banquet. It is about what happens when grace meets resistance. When a mother stands up for her child, not in anger, but with steadfast dignity. Catherine didn't speak. She didn't need to. She had appeared. She walked through the doors they never wanted her daughter to pass. And in doing so, she reminded the world and the court that legacy is not only inherited, sometimes it must also be protected. Charlotte didn't need to speak or wear a crown to capture everyone's attention. She only needed to be fiercely loved and bravely protected. And that night, she lived on forever in the years that followed. When her name was written alongside titles and duties, when she bore the heavy weight of royal expectations on her shoulders, she would remember the night she wasn't allowed to be there and the mother who made sure she was. Because in the long, glorious timeline of the monarchy, the most powerful changes don't always happen with ceremony. Sometimes they begin with a name that was lost and a mother who refused to let it stay missing. If you enjoyed this story, please share, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful truths behind the palace walls.